Welcome to Babes in Bookland, your favorite book club podcast that focuses on women's stories. I'm your host, Alex Franca, and today I'm sitting down with Dr. Jessica Zucker, psychologist, author, and the woman behind the viral #IHadAMiscarriage movement, to talk about her two books, her memoir, I Had a Miscarriage, and her newest work, Normalize It, Upending the Silence, Stigma, and Shame that Shape Women's Lives. We get into grief, shame, the culture of silence around women's bodies, and why letting yourself actually feel things might be the bravest thing you can do. This conversation is tender and honest. Let's get to it. Hi, Jessica.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on. I think both of these books are such gifts to women and to people. Men experience shame as well. They are full of gentle wake-up moments, reckonings, encouragement, camaraderie, and love. Thank you for writing them. I know that they're helping so many people find strength and feel less alone.
Thank you so much for saying that. It means so much. When you're in the writing process, it can be hard to remember or to imagine how it will land. It's easy to lose sight of the enormity, of the sort of global impact something can have. I appreciate you saying that.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your process we're going to start with your memoir, I Had a Miscarriage. And it's interesting that you bring up this global influence that you have because you wrote this memoir after starting this hashtag, correct?
That's right.
So you kind of knew that there was this audience out there, these women craving other women's stories about having miscarriages and difficult fertility journeys and all of that.
Yeah. So essentially, I guess I can go all the way back in time. So, I'm a Los Angeles-based psychologist and I specialize in women's reproductive and maternal mental health. And I've done so for over 15 years at this point. And so I specialized in this before going through it firsthand. And so a lot of people seem to think that, you got into this topic after experiencing your 16-week miscarriage while you were home by yourself. But that's just not the case.
Why did you get into it then? How did you pick it?
I have a background in public health. So I had studied public health prior to pursuing my PhD. My vision, I guess, for my career was really to focus on all things women's health, women's mental health. And that, of course, included pregnancy and pregnancy loss and life after. And at the time, when I was 20 something, I had not gone through any of these things personally. Until I did, so 16 weeks into my second pregnancy, I had a miscarriage while I was home alone. My husband was at work. My son was at preschool. And it was unfathomable, just the sort of level of trauma and intensity. I feel like my sort of life lens shifted, the actual sort of light of the day changed for me as I sort of hoped that I wouldn't lose my own life during this experience. It was very unusual. I have not heard stories like this in the confines of my office over all of these years, but I think that was part of what inspired me to write about it and share my personal journey through it all, right? So I had turned to the research, and the research shows that a majority of people feel a sense of shame and self-blame and even guilt in the aftermath of miscarriage and stillbirth and infant loss and all of these tragic events. And I wondered why, and I had heard about it face to face in my office, in my clinical practice, but I didn't understand sort of how is it that we go through something so life-changing and then we're blaming ourselves?
And out of our control, life-changing.
Exactly. Totally out of our control. And I realized, though, that it's, unfortunately, a lot of people don't have the information, like the basic sort of medical or scientific information that's needed to understand that a majority of miscarriages happen in the first trimester, which mine did not, and happen because of chromosomal abnormalities. the research shows, though, that people think that it's because they carried something heavy or because they exercised that day or because they had a sip of wine before they knew they were even pregnant. And I just felt outraged and compelled to be part of women being louder about something that is so ubiquitous. This is not going away. No one's trying to cure it. It's not like cancer where people are setting this in a lab and trying to make it go away. This is actually a normative outcome of pregnancy.
It's actually it's an evolutionary,
Yes.
It's a good evolutionary thing.
I appreciate you saying that because I come from a background of doctors. And so I didn't feel a sense of shame. I thought of it like, oh, if there's a chromosomal abnormality here, and it turned out there was, we had the fetus tested, then this wasn't a healthy being and this wasn't going to be a good situation all the way around. I guess I wish that the zeitgeist sort of talked more openly about these facts so that it wouldn't feel as personal. Of course, again, that doesn't change the grief level, but it would change the way that we are hard on ourselves after we go through something like this.
It feels like that's just part of the human condition, though. We want to rationalize everything. That's true.
I mean, as women, because like my husband did no blaming of himself. Like there was no, and I luckily didn't either, but I haven't heard a lot from partners in my practice about, well, maybe I did something wrong. I mean, it's rarely that, right? So like as women, I feel like we're groomed from the get-go to think that we somehow have a hand in all of our outcomes, which is just untrue.
I think, though, just to speak to the broader human experience, we all do want to feel like we're in control of something 100%. When we're not.
Yes.
And I think that can be really hard to let go of. I do want to say, I mean, your experience reading it, I had a miscarriage as well. And I did that thing. I've spoken on the show about it with other authors who have shared their experiences. I did that thing where like I minimized my grief and my trauma because it could have technically been like a chemical miscarriage.
Right.
But I still experienced grief. I still thought that there was the potential of a baby, a dream of a baby. And that dream was taken away. But your experience was wild. And I know we shouldn't compare experiences, but reading it, it's just, I cannot believe that you picked yourself up off the floor. Literally.
I know. I mean, and yes, I have so much to say about comparing and contrasting losses. And I appreciate you saying that because my story is the story that nobody wants to be near, right? And I write about that in my first book. It's like, I think that culturally, since we're so quiet about grief, people somehow think it's contagious.
And death. It's weird.
And death. Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
And so they think, oh, if I avoid it altogether, or if I think like that you did do something wrong during your pregnancy and I'll just avoid doing that thing, then it won't happen to me.
It's all about that control. It's like,
really
we could all just realize if we could just relinquish control, we could shed a lot of other stuff.
I mean, I think that if we, I mean, this is a whole other sort of sidebar, but like, if we could drill down into meditative practices, really realizing that like what we have is right now, what we have is the present moment, what we have is our breath, and be a little bit more sort of grateful for even just that, even just our conversation right now. I think we would do better to sort of, I don't know, we would undo a lot of the anxiety and angst that we all live with because we're grasping at controlling things that are far out of reach.
I completely agree. Talk to me about making this decision to also use some of your patients' stories to strengthen this collective experience as opposed to keeping it solely your singular story.
I do that in both the books. Well, I'll start by saying that these are definitely not real patients. These are fictitious composite stories. And actually, I really enjoyed the fictional writing. I mean, I never knew that I would be interested in fiction writing, which I'm not about to try to take that on, by the way. But, but there was a freedom in sort of culling all of the real-time research I had done in my practice and combining various stories. And I wanted to be sure in both books to give enough varied examples that any woman who picked up this book would somehow see themselves within it. I'm sure that I missed the mark somehow because there's no way to capture everybody. So I would sometimes sort of have a prior patient in mind, but it was never sort of then painted as her and her story and her specific details, obviously, because I didn't want anyone to pick it up, current patient, prior patient, future patient, and think, oh, wait, that's actually me. And
she put me in her book. Yikes.
Yeah, I would never want to do that. No. The reason I didn't make my memoir just about me is because, the truth is it's a memoir about miscarriage. It's not actually a memoir about my entire life, like some memoirs are. I think the important through line here is to essentially show and tell the reader that we should be leaning into shifting this resounding and antiquated silence, stigma, and shame that surrounds this topic and too many other topics in women's lives. And so I wasn't enough, and I'm not everything. And I don't think of myself as the only person, of course, who has had a miscarriage. And I wanted desperately to show the reader, like I wanted them to be a fly on the wall in my office so that they could really feel what therapy is like. And also so that, if somebody had had an early loss or if somebody had a stillbirth, that they saw themselves in this book.
And I think you accomplished that beautifully.
Thank you.
So you said that this book came out in 2021, but before that you did have this, I had a miscarriage hashtag that went around social media. What has been some of the most rewarding feedback, either from your story or from the hashtag, and most unexpected as well?
Well, I think most unexpected was actually sort of how my initial writings on the topic galvanized so much unexpected support for me, like who would have ever thought, it's like I'm putting this piece, my first piece ever in the New York Times about miscarriage with a sign that says hashtag IHadAMiscarriage. And then I'm like flooded with DMs and emails from women everywhere.
Yeah.
And just connecting in that way, because for me, therapy's always been a mainstay. As a therapist, I believe, it's important to be in therapy. But the truth is, ultimately, writing has been my sort of ultimate healer, if you want to, for lack of a better word. The community then coming around and seeing our connection, our sort of not wanting to be a part of this club, but here we are. And I never would have met you otherwise type of feeling. It was beautiful and inspiring. And, and also there's so much anguish that we could commune around. I think that just really, I remember when that piece came out, I was like numb for maybe a week. I just taking it all in and seeing, its viral nature. It's not what I expected. And I'm not necessarily like a limelight person. So I just was sort of like, my head was spinning from all of it. My deep down hope, though, was to bring about a global conversation and to get women questioning, if I haven't talked about this, is it because I'm private and I just don't want it to, be out in the world? And or is it that there are some seedlings of shame, or there has been enough of an influence from culture telling you to be quiet, or to, like you said, minimize the experience. Like, oh, it was just so early. Like, I don't have the right to feel sad like so-and-so does. I wanted to really try to help people say, you know what, I can feel what I feel no matter my experience. And I do actually think that sometimes we inadvertently lean into the comparing and contrasting in order to thwart the grief. And so we think, like we say to ourselves, oh, it's because, it wasn't that bad, like compared to what it could have been. Or is it that it's too scary to really swim in that sadness for a bit? Because we all fear, like you were just talking about control, like we all fear that if we allow ourselves to dip into it that we might drown and we may not get out. We all know, though, intellectually, that's not true. I mean, we will emerge, but we will be different. And that's why I do try to encourage my patients. Let's just see what grief does to us. Like, let it wash over you. Being changed is not a bad thing. And sometimes grief allows us to see things in new ways, brings new people into our lives, exits some people, maybe sometimes, but it is what it is.
Yeah. I think we are conditioned to think that grief ruins us, but actually, I think it's seeing people try to avoid grief, and we've like messed it up in our head somehow, but it's really the avoidance of grief and the reliance on the numbers, the pills, the alcohol. That's really what's ruining people.
Exactly. We use so much psychic energy trying to stave off quote unquote negative emotion, which includes grief, that we find ourselves sometimes in the throes of addiction or, other ways of trying not to feel.
Yes. Let's get back to your experience that you detail in your memoir, I Had a Miscarriage. In what ways did your professional experience make your personal grief easier or harder to navigate?
I think what made my grief harder to navigate was actually the fact that I specialized in this and that I was in private practice. So there was no HR, there was no professional to turn to, there was no manager to turn to, no boss to say, take 2 weeks, take a month. This is what we do here. We honor your grief or something totally else. But like I had to make up the rules as I went along. So that was one thing. And as I am open about in the book, I didn't give myself time. And, for various reasons, one being I did not want my patients to worry about me since they were coming to me for them. Secondly, I just didn't see how it would be helpful for me to spend the day in bed. Maybe I was being like overly logical. I think I was worried that if I stayed in bed or just sort of like lounged around the house by myself, that I would feel worse, which I wasn't afraid of feeling whatever I was feeling, but I didn't know how sort of being alone all day was going to be useful for me. And then thirdly, like the truth is my work is my heart and my passion and my drive and my intellectual curiosity. And like, so why would I want to break from that even though I was hurting? Like, so it was tough to figure out. Do I look back and have feelings of regret? Should I have taken off more time? Maybe. What was really difficult, though, about having this background, which I think I mentioned earlier, is like my story scared people that had been coming to me for a long time. And a couple of people left as a result. And that was very painful to know that what happened to me made them think it could happen to them. And that what happened to me made them then not have the entrenched support that they currently had. I mean, there's plenty of people in LA and others specialize in this. So I'm not saying they couldn't find someone else, but starting over in therapy is not necessarily straightforward.
It's not. You gotta you come and you're just like, can I just hand you all the notes from my last person? Yeah.
Exactly. And you don't know if it's the right fit and you have to get to know their vibe. And so that was really challenging.
Yeah. It's interesting you bring up this, not wanting to stay in bed all day. We were just talking about how you feel your grief, and you said you weren't afraid to do that. But I think that's something else to think about. Do we know what's indulgence and what's simply feeling, simply being?
Yeah.
I think people don't want to be victims, right? We want to feel strong. We want to feel okay.
Yes.
It is so hard to walk that line, isn't it?
I know. I'm also thinking about 2 weeks after my first book came out, I was diagnosed with breast cancer, which, then led me down this whole other sort of trauma corridor. That was a situation also where it's like, did I give myself enough time to grieve and to heal from surgeries and stuff? But the thing is, like, I know that I sort of psychologically do better when I am actively engaged in what I love.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't see it as like binary. So it's not like, oh, if I work for 5 hours today, that I'm not also grieving. Like, I would often get in my car and just like start sobbing. And even like with the cancer, like I would find myself in my car, like screaming. I think we can have both. I will admit, like, I understand that in my career, I feel like I can do both. I know that a majority of jobs are 9 to 5. There's lots of people around you. You're going to meetings. There's so much expected. So I do think it's a privilege in my type of work that if I need to schedule an hour in between patients for myself, I can do that. So
Yeah.
that's pretty unusual for a career, I think.
Do you think there's a way, if people don't have access to therapy, but they're going through something, there are
Mm.
little check-ins that they can do to make sure that they're, I don't want to say grieving the right way because there's no right or wrong way to do it. But if you are not allowing yourself to feel something, it can manifest. There are consequences, right, in our lives. On the flip side, people don't have time sometimes to grieve.
That's true.
Are there any little check-ins that you can offer? Like, hey, if you are feeling one way about something, I don't know. Do you know what I'm trying to
Yeah.
ask you? Just like, okay, great.
Yes, I do.
Because
And
I
I
can't
hope,
articulate it.
no, I do. And I love it. I hope that I address some of this in my second book in Normalize It, because the point of that book is really to say, like, if therapy isn't your thing, or if it's out of reach, or, just not something you're inclined to do, there are several ways that we can share our stories. We can feel our pain. We can experience what we're experiencing without getting on a rooftop, with a megaphone. We don't have to do some viral hashtag. The simplest thing that I can say is write in a journal or write in your phone, whatever it is, to allow your feelings to surface, right? So it doesn't have to be writing, it can be a different type of exercise. But if we don't allow ourselves to feel, especially like the profundity of grief, how's it going to show up in our bodies, in our lives, in our relationships? And who did that serve that we shoved it so deep? Who? Is it because, oh, we wanted to have a bright and shiny face for the neighbor or our colleague or our parents, or I don't know. So I think we have to create space, but it doesn't have to be time. So that's the thing. I think people think like, oh, if I fall into the grief, this is going to be years of like, unbridled, whatever. No. Even if somebody carves out 3 minutes a day to be with the depth of their feelings, great.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
It's almost
So
like letting the lid off of like a pressure cooker a
yeah,
little
it's like
bit.
we
Yeah.
can't use, I think we cannot use time as an excuse. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
people who think that it's indulgent to grieve are just afraid of it. Because
Ooh, I love that.
and I hope I drive this home in my first book. Not everybody grieves miscarriages. Not everybody
Yeah.
grieves, many things. And so again, if it's genuine to the person that they're just like, I didn't want to be pregnant, or I knew something was wrong and I'm actually relieved it's over, or, this parent and I had a lot of struggles, and I mean, I'm going to have to deal with the intensity of what that relationship was, but it's okay with me that they're no longer here. So I'm trying to think of examples that allow people to understand that, of course, grieving is not linear. It's totally circuitous, and it can pop up at any time. We don't have to be like, today I didn't allow myself to grieve and therefore I'm bad. It's like, absolutely not. And people continue to ask me about my miscarriage. And the truth is, at this point, this many years later, it's been over a decade, I don't spend time grieving that loss. But if you would have asked me, pre-cancer, I still, at least on the anniversary of my loss, like it was, very heavy and weighty. And perhaps I don't think about it as much because so much else has happened. And
Yeah.
also because I really allowed myself to go there.
Yeah. I'm hearing you just have to give yourself permission. Check in. What are you feeling today? Acknowledge it, surrender to it in a minimal way if that's all you've got time for. I heard once that it's not that your grief gets smaller, it's just that your life gets bigger. And
Mm,
it feels like that's
love it.
exactly what you're saying.
I love that. And, and for me, and I don't believe that we need to sort of compare and contrast traumas, but being face to face with cancer, I think just changed my view of what I had been through. I also will say, and my books, or my first book anyway, talks a lot about this. I mean, I did get pregnant 3 months after my loss. I didn't breathe through that subsequent pregnancy. And I'm very open and honest about that. But I do think that I've been so busy raising my two kids that eventually that grief has moved through. And when I was face to face with a life-threatening illness, it just sort of shifted my focus, I guess.
Which makes complete sense.
Yeah,
Sounds like you were just living as presently as possible.
that's right.
Too. I loved the part where you actively figured out how to honor
Mm.
Olive, which was the name that you gave your baby. Talk to me about going to Japan. This whole part was amazing.
I wouldn't have thought to even name the fetus, the baby, had I not met all of these people that I met through writing.
Mm,
I just didn't even know it was a thing. I didn't name my lost baby. I think it was like not for at least 9 months, 12 months, maybe more. I'd have to look back. I don't remember right now. So the name Olive was because my son wanted to name a baby Olive. And then I sort of did a deep dive into what that name means and what it signifies. And it meant a lot. In Japan, it seems that they honor out loud when it comes to pregnancy and infant loss. They've got this, garden. It's like a park kind of garden situation. It's in the middle of the city in Tokyo. And people are there burning incense and other things, and with these like pinwheels and little sort of ornaments and things that represent, I guess, to them their loss. But what I found so just mind blowing and enviable, what I wish that we had here was the fact that people were walking to work and walking through and by this situation.
mm,
Right. So it was integrated. That's what I'm trying to say. It's like it was integrated into the daily culture. It was normalized to be grieving or visiting or paying homage on whatever day. I don't speak Japanese, so I wasn't able to ask people, are you here because it's the 1 year? Is it a special day, or do you come every day? I mean, I don't know. But it was so compelling.
mhm.
And yeah, it felt really important. I do things on the anniversary of my loss. It's interesting. I think most people honor on the day, like the due date. And for some reason, I think because my situation was so life-threatening to me, even and left such an impression, the details of that afternoon, that's the day I think about to honor her most.
Do you honor her and honor yourself, your strength, your resilience?
Oh, no.
Mm,
I don't think I do that day. Well, when I think about that day, or as that day approaches every year, it's October 11th. Yeah, I kind of go into this place of like, how did I go through that? Like, how did I live through that? And in the book, I talk about like, did she feel pain? And I've decided she didn't, because
mhm.
it's the most comfortable way to think about it. I'll never know sort of exactly when her heart stopped beating, but it's like, yeah, I just have to kind of think that like,
Yeah.
yeah. And I think by the time she came out, there was no heartbeat. So, and there's no consciousness, obviously, in a fetus. So it's not like she was like, oh my goodness, this is about to happen. She wasn't experiencing anxiety. I like to remind myself of that. But I don't know. I don't know if I give myself, I guess, enough credit for all that I went through and all that I've created as a result.
Maybe you should.
Maybe I should. But maybe that's what keeps me going is like it's partly like the humility around it all that it's like never enough for me that culture hasn't fully embraced this topic. And so I'm just like, let's do more. I gotta say more on this, you know.
In your memoir and also in Normalize It, you talk about the culture of silence. I loved the section on can pleasure and grief coexist, which I thought that was so interesting. I think that that's something that, I mean, I'm even struggling with today with what's going on in the world. It's like, do I deserve to be happy? Do I deserve to feel joy when so many people are living in so much anxiety? And so your book it just asks a lot of questions, and it gives us all permission to reflect and to think and to spend that time on ourselves. And, you know, we've been talking about how I think just as women, we don't feel like we can spend time on ourselves, but it's true. Like, it's our life.
It is. And what's the rush? Can we be with both or all, you know? And yeah, I understand what you're saying about the state of the world, but I do think, and it's so hard to remember this and actually feel it authentically. Like without joy, life is pretty tough.
Yeah.
I mean, that's often what depression looks like, you know? And so if there is genuine joy amidst the world issues, amidst so much fear and terror, I think we somehow have to carve out those moments to enjoy because we need to hold on to some hope.
Yeah. I keep reminding myself that joy is resistance because that's exactly what they, them, whoever they, them are, want. They want fear. They want despair. And so every moment that you rage against that in joy is a moment that you're choosing life and choosing to be optimistic and hopeful about life.
I love that so much.
Let's get into Normalize It, upending the silence, stigma, and shame that shape women's lives. And yes, it does shape our lives, unfortunately. How did Normalize It feel like a continuation of or a departure from I Had a Miscarriage? What did writing the first book teach you about this one?
I mean, it's an interesting backstory. So it was during my cancer experience that this publisher reached out. They're a mental health publishing company. Well, they're a mental health company in general, and then they have a publishing arm. And so I was very familiar with them. I do a lot of my continuing education through them. And I was excited to get this email. But I also didn't know if I could take on anything long term at the time because I was in the depth of fear, you could say. So I was incredibly honored that they wanted me to do a book for them. But it was an interesting process because it wasn't like, oh, I had a proposal and I had exactly in mind what I wanted to do next. They sort of came to me and said, will you do a book? And we're open to what it is. And that was really different. I didn't come to this one with this same sort of like, this has to be said, and this passion that was oozing from me, like the memoir. And so I had to take some time to think about if I had the time and space to do another book, firstly. You know, secondly, it was like, what do I really want to say? Do I have more to say? I loved that they offered me an opportunity to expand. Because the truth is, I specialize in women's reproductive and maternal mental health. That's not just loss. And I became sort of known as the loss person. So anytime a celebrity had a loss, the press called me. And I was, of course, like very up for that because this became the thing I was talking so much about. But I also care about a lot of other issues that women are going through. So that is ultimately what led me to decide that this was about normalizing, talking about hard stuff that women go through. And so that way I knew that it could incorporate pregnancy loss, but also everything else from menstruation through menopause and then some. Is it a departure from the book or is it an extension of the first book? I don't think that the books feel or sound anything alike, although they both use, you know, the fictitious patients to sort of, I think in Normalize It, the patients help the reader understand what therapy looks like and feels like. But also we really were trying to show the fact that there is not one way to share your story, to feel your feelings, to navigate pain and pleasure. They feel very different to me. Again, like one was this sort of all passion and this second one was an assignment. But then when it coalesced, like when it really came together for me, I felt that burning passion, luckily, for the second book as well.
That definitely reads in the pages. It just, like I said earlier, I mean, I call these gifts because it's so obvious that like all you want us to do is not feel shame and to share our stories and to normalize it.
I know.
But like, so here's the $100 question or the $1,000,000 question. Why do we feel shame?
Yeah, that's a good question.
I mean, you do break it down and all the individual ways through the
Yeah.
book. Why does shame exist? Why do women, I'm sure that has something to do with evolution and like,
Right.
man.
I mean, it's like its own TED Talk, and Brene Brown probably did that very well.
Probably.
I think shame exists, I think, primarily in women because, no, not to say that men don't feel it, but when it comes to women, I think they primarily feel it because of this cultural silence around all of these major milestones. Our bodies go through so much. I'm in perimenopause now, so I still do get a period, but I'm in this kind of fluctuating hormone time in my life. And I cannot believe the way it affects physical and mental health. And yes, there's a slew of major books on the topic now, but my mom didn't talk to me about it growing up. She still doesn't talk about it. So it's these things that we don't talk about get converted into shame. I mean, it's obviously way more complex than that, but simply put, I think that when we feel we can't talk about something, or when we see other women or people modeling something in a way that is kind of like less than great, that's what happens. So, and we see on the billboards, all of the models. Okay, so then I feel ashamed if I don't look like that. And I feel ashamed of my period because the nurse told me to go back to class and that period cramps aren't a thing. Or like, I mean, I'm just trying to think of things that these are not personal to me, but it's culture that leaks into our family lives and leak into, the schools and the things we're taught and what is said to us, and then what we begin to think of ourselves too.
Yeah, I think it is also like a diminishing, when I think of women who do suffer real period cramps, which, I praise the Lord that I never did, but I had friends who would vomit the first day of their period, literally couldn't get out of bed. And it's something that men just literally can't understand.
No.
And so they diminish it. And, when you look back through history and you read about how men didn't think that labor was painful for women because they couldn't experience that pain themselves. So therefore they didn't think it exists. And it is just interesting. I do think misogyny, I know it's the hot button word right now, but I think that it's a big proponent of shame and silence in women's experiences and women's history. All that being said, do you think shame can be a useful tool? Because I think more people need to feel shamed right now, personally.
Oh, well, I mean, that's an interesting perspective. I mean, right. There are, perhaps people on the narcissistic spectrum or sociopathic spectrum that may be impervious to shame because they don't have that capacity for remorse or integration of what others are actually feeling. So they feel entitled, and shame doesn't even come within miles of them. I mean, and if it does, they have a very productive way of staving it off and throwing it in the trash. That's an interesting question. Yes, there are some people who would be better off being able to access shame. But unfortunately, it's usually the people who deserve to be enjoying their lives a bit more who are actually harder on themselves. And that often lands us in the front seat of shame and not knowing how to get out of it.
Right. And I think the whole point of your book is that the more that we talk about these things, the more that we talk about these things, the more that we talk about these things, we can break out of that cycle. You have a daughter.
Yes.
How do you talk about these things with her?
Yeah, it is interesting having a daughter because I have a son as well. And I've been very sort of direct in talking with him about body stuff, even when they were in preschool, who can touch your body, who can't, just, from the beginning. But, and then also now that my son is 17, talking to him about sexuality, sex, like these feelings, respect. For some reason, it feels easier to talk to him about it than it does with her. We talk about these things because if we don't do that, who will?
People without their frontal lobe fully developed, and that's scary. But also,
Exactly.
I mean,
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
talked, I said normalize it. Women need to share their stories, but men need to be right there with
Oh,
us,
completely.
listening and talking.
Yeah,
So,
especially with all of these scary stories about men doing, some very monstrous things. And it's
yeah.
nothing new, but it's just like really intense that it's everywhere and triggering a lot of women who have been through very difficult things. I feel a huge responsibility with my son on that front. And with my daughter, I'm sort of waiting for her period to arrive. And I'm always thinking about what is the best way to acknowledge this once it arrives. Right. And so, and also talking about her body changes
Mm-hmm.
because I don't want to point something out until she talks about it. So even with like acne, I've been sort of hesitant to be the one to say, like, oh, sweetie, like we should get this looked at because my fear is that that creates a self consciousness that perhaps wasn't there. So
Yeah.
I'm trying to let her take the lead. But with the period, these days, like some people are talking about like period parties and like doing something major to celebrate. I don't know if I go all the way in that direction because I think that could be a little misleading and kind of, I don't know that she would understand what we're doing.
Yeah.
She's 12, so it's like, why would we celebrate my
Her
period?
ability to have
Yeah,
like a
yeah,
baby too.
yeah.
Like what
I
exactly is it
know.
like signaling?
That's the thing.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's
Yeah.
why I feel like it's incredibly sensitive because it actually, it's a big responsibility. I think it's a lot for a girl to have to then manage at school and in life. And luckily, I mean, she has a bunch of friends who have already gotten it. So I think that should make things a little bit easier, hopefully. And she's at an all-girls school. And I hopefully think that that also paves the way for just not feeling like you have to hide it and not feeling like you're
Yeah.
the only one or have boys make fun of you or something.
I was someone who was a majorly late bloomer, and it's just talking about shame. I felt so much shame that I had not started my period.
Yeah,
It's
I
like you're
know.
damned if you do, you're damned
It's
if you don't.
true.
I love your approach with your daughter. I also wonder if there are ways where we can let our children know that we're here. I know, because it's so tricky. It's like you don't want to bring something up if it's not a thing, but maybe it is a thing
Right.
to bring it up to you because then because she feels ashamed of it. It's
I
just like,
know. I
what do we
don't
do?
know. I don't know. It's like I try to model in general openness and I
Yeah.
try to
I can
sort of,
see that, by the way.
yeah.
I feel like you're exactly that kind
Yeah.
of
So, and
mom.
I try to be like, I try to float ideas like in a kind of nonchalant way sometimes, like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm making dinner. And then I'm like, oh, what were your friends like today? Like, so that it's not like dun da da, we're having a
Checking in
major
with you.
conversation. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly. And so my hope there is that she will feel like she can turn to me about anything and everything. But it is more complicated. I do think that girls from the beginning, even raised in families that are super open, can feel this sense of embarrassment or secrecy or at least quietness around things related to their bodies.
Yeah.
And
It's so interesting because it is this universal experience most of the time, right? I guess in theory, not everyone will get their period, but it does feel so individually bad
mhm,
for
mhm.
you in the wrong way.
Yeah, I like you. I didn't get my period until I was 15, and I actually only got it once that year and didn't really start getting it regularly until I was 16. I didn't have shame, but I had my dad take me to some doctors. I mean, I was like actually worried that it meant something about the future. So it's like Either
Yeah.
way, if you get it early, there's a lot of feelings. If you get it later, there's a lot of feelings. It's a topic that if we can be a bit more vocal in general, even if we sort of put our feet in our mouth about it, that would help people feel a sense of ease. I'd rather somebody say to me, I have no idea what to say to you right now. Like, I've never in my life thought about what you went through with your miscarriage, but I'm here for you. Right now, nobody asks me about my cancer diagnosis or my experience because it was 5 years ago. And yet, to me, in a way, it feels sort of fresh because it was such a big deal and went on for so long. But for some people, once they're done, they want to be done. So I do think it's beautiful and brave and scary to be the friend or the family member who just says, hey, no clue if you want to talk about this. I love you. I wonder how you're feeling, if you're feeling anything about this at all. And then then you've said it, and then you've opened that door and you've normalized the fact that we can talk about things 5 years later, 10 years later, whatever. I think that yields closeness. Like, I think that is emotional intimacy personified. I really do.
I think you're right. One of my favorite texts to send is thinking of you here if you want to talk. We can
Exactly.
talk about what you're going through, or we can talk about the
The
Justin
weather.
Baldoni Blake Lively case. Like, you know what I mean? Whatever.
Totally. Anything. I am here for you, thinking of you. I know that's beautiful. And I think that's
Yeah.
perfect.
As we wrap up our discussion today, your book, Normalize It, has been both called a mirror and a manifesto. Which one
Mm.
feels more true to you?
Oh, that's interesting. I bet it will land differently with each person who reads it. I would say it's a manifesto with the opportunity to have a mirror held up at the end of each chapter. It's, saying, let's change the culture. We can do it. Here are the tools. Let's go. And it's saying, and just be sure to take a look, check in with yourself. Do you resonate with these feelings? Are they feelings that you want to shed and move through?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, I love
yeah,
that. A little bit of both.
yeah, for
Us
sure.
crazy humans, we're just such a walking contradiction of
I
everything.
know, so complex.
I know. Okay. And then before I let you go, was there a shame, though, as you were going through it, that you realized you were particularly passionate about researching and discussing and putting in the book because it felt closer to you?
In the body image chapter, I created a breast cancer patient who I had have some things in common with my experience and some things totally not. And I'm so glad that I did that, because
Yeah.
again, women in the reproductive years or the pregnancy focused years don't think they need to be thinking about breast cancer and the other reproductive cancers, which I didn't include. I mean, I couldn't include everything I wanted to. There was just no way. But since I think it's like 1 in 7, 1 in 8 women get diagnosed with breast cancer, I felt like I've got to include this. So that felt really important, especially from the body image perspective.
Yeah, and I
Because,
felt like that was
yeah,
very different because when you think body image, you think eating disorders. And I really appreciated that because it did make me pause and reflect.
yeah, because I think
Yeah.
like most people are focused on the outcome. Like, okay, great, you don't have cancer anymore. Let's move on. Woo. Well, we've been objectified about our bodies and our breasts in particular since
Mhm.
we had them. And then we are having them removed and not for, pleasant reasons. And so it's like, how does one grapple with that?
Yeah.
And what does it look like? What does it feel like? I wanted people to understand that nuance, that some women can feel just as sexy and beautiful with whatever they get, if it's implants, if they do reconstruction, if they don't, and some not. And so I think that's really a very sort of under talked about experience that people go through in breast cancer.
I agree. I'm so glad that you included it. All right, Jessica, I have a question that I ask all of my authors. How do
Yes.
you stay hopeful today?
I look into the eyes of my children, and I feel like that really gives me focus and optimism and just a deep sense of soulfulness that even though the world is so incredibly rocky, that these little people will hopefully grow up and continue to make a difference in the world.
How can people find you?
They can find me on my website, which is drjessicazucker.com. They can also find me on Instagram at IHadAMiscarriage, and my books can be found anywhere books are sold.
That's right. And we will link ways to buy them through bookshop.org. We will link all the links to your socials. Thank you so much for coming on today. I so enjoyed our conversation. I think all of your clients, patients are just the luckiest individuals.
Oh,
I think you're healing a lot of people on that scale. And then through your books, like I said, they are gifts. So thank you so much for having this conversation with me today.
Thank you so much. You are wonderful. Thanks so much for having me. It means the world.
Bye. Thank you all so much for listening today. If you enjoyed our conversation, please rate and review the show wherever you podcast and send it to a friend. That's the easiest way to support the show. And if you'd like to further support the show, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Patreon for exclusive bonus content or find some pretty cute merch at TeePublic. Those links are always in our show notes. Next week, I've got a book club chat with my friend Becca. She's back to discuss Good for a Girl. It's elite runner Lauren Fleshman's memoir chronicling her career from NCAA champion to pro, while exposing the way sports systems built for men fail female athletes. Like Jessica's books, it's part personal story, part manifesto, calling for reform around issues like eating disorders, injury, and the pressures on girls to perform in a world that wasn't designed for them. We'll see you here next week. Take care.